Hi team, welcome to the next video which brings demand and supply together to speak to the market equilibrium. So I'm sure you saw this in year 11, but we're just going to recap it and make sure it's crystal clear. So you need to be able to analyse and explain the effects of changes in supply and demand on equilibrium prices and quantity traded. And to do that, you've got to have a really robust understanding of all the demand and supply side factors that create shifts in the curves, because that's the kickoff, right? Something will happen in the market, it'll lead to a shift, and then that's when you're on. You need to be able to explain that story, okay? So you've seen this before. You've got a supply curve, demand curve, bringing it all together, and then the intersection point gives us our price and our quantity traded. So we get a sense of what the original P and Q was in this market before anything happens. So just I suppose a little note here, if you ever need to draw a graph for any reason, as in a supply or demand diagram, this is your starting point. So don't worry about which curve's going in which direction. Just get this on paper and you will score a few marks, even if maybe for whatever reason you don't have much else to contribute, okay? Notice that the y-axis is labelled price. You can just call it P if that's what you want to do, and then the x-axis is quantity with a Q, all right? And notice it says P star Q star. I'll be using P1 Q1. It's exactly the same thing, all right? The other part is that the supply and demand curve are labelled. So all the labels, all the dotted lines, everything needs to be there, and I encourage you to use a ruler. Okay, so what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today is how we go from equilibrium to disequilibrium back to equilibrium. And to do that, you've got to have an understanding of what a surplus and a shortage looks like. So at price E, all right, we've got QE, we're in equilibrium. But then let's assume for some reason, and we'll talk about those reasons in a moment, but let's assume for some reason there's an increase in price from PE to P2, okay? If that happens, and I draw this dotted line, this white dotted line across the top, you can see that my new intersection point with the demand curve is over here, but my new intersection point with the supply curve is over here, okay? I've got a situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. That's an issue. That's an issue for suppliers because they're going to have too much stock, okay? That is what we refer to as a surplus, where the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. All right. The complete opposite of that, if you have a look down at P1, so assume price has fallen for whatever reason from PE to P1, you draw your dotted line across, all right, and we're going to look at these two intersection points now. So the first intersection point is now with my supply curve. So I hit my supply curve first. At P1, producers are only able and willing to produce at Q1. But at P1, if I keep going across, consumers now demand Q2. I've got a situation where the quantity demanded, Q2, exceeds the quantity supplied, Q1. We've all been in that situation before. A bunch of us want something, producers, for whatever reason, can't or unable to produce the amount we want. That leads to what we call a shortage, okay? And if something's in shortage, have a think about what happens to its price. Okay, let's keep going. So I've just gone through this, so you can have a look at this slide in your own time. Basically reiterates what we just went through. And here's a real world example. So if you go to the supermarket right now, there is an oversupply of avocados. And that's because of the incredible growing conditions up north. So there's some much needed relief at the checkout as the cost of avocados is smashed due to improved growing conditions, and there's an oversupply. So we're seeing a decrease in the cost of a single avocado from possibly up to $3 down to sort of $1.80. All right, so that's an example in the real world. Really common with fresh fruit and vegetables, obviously because farmers are at the mercy of the weather. I wanted to show you the two reasons for a surplus. Okay, so remember, surplus is to do with a situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. There's only two reasons why it can happen. If you have a look on the left, you'll see that there is a surplus at P1. So P1's my original price. Follow the blue line across, okay? I'm seeing a situation where the quantity demanded is equal to Q1, but the quantity supplied is out here on this green dotted line. I should really have Q3 sitting there, but I don't. So you've got a situation where the quantity that is supplied is greater than the quantity that is demanded. Now, ignore everything else that's going on in the graph. We'll talk to the sort of the dynamic shifts in a moment. But because of an initial increase in supply, we're seeing a surplus. And that's exactly what happened here, right? So you dealt with avocados. There was too many of them that led to a surplus. The other side is that there is a decrease in demand. So if the demand curve shifts to the left, again, start at P1 and follow it across. The first intersection point is with the demand curve. So if we follow the green line down, you can imagine Q3 would be sitting here. So that would be the quantity that is demanded. But keep going, the intersection with the old supply curve is still at Q1. So I've got a situation where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Imagine all of us today or tomorrow just reduced our demand for a product. No one's buying it. Well, that's obviously going to lead to a situation where producers have got too much of it, and that's going to lead to a surplus. So here are your two surplus options. Make sure you know them. And then a shortage. I won't go through it again, but the basics are the fact that you're dealing with the supply being less than what is demanded, i.e. the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. Okay? So I found this example online. Dried Fruits Australia says unfavourable conditions worldwide is threatening global shortage. So we're dealing with dried apricots and other dried fruits. Unfortunately, due to negative climatic conditions, the supply has gone down. So supply goes down, demand stays the same, demand exceeds supply, we're dealing with a shortage. So similar to the other slide, these are the only two scenarios for a shortage. Now, if you compare this slide to the other one, you'll notice that they don't overlap, okay? These are two freshies, they're two different, but they go in opposite directions. So, for example, the first one on the left is dealing with a situation where demand increases. All right, we haven't looked at this one yet. So the demand curve, for whatever reason, shifts to the right. It has to be due to a demand side factor. And if we start at P1 and follow the dotted line across, we can see that Q1, all right, is the intersection with the supply curve. So Q1 is the quantity that is supplied, but keep going across to the dotted line, you're now dealing with a new quantity demanded because of obviously the increase in demand. So quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied, bang, we've got a shortage. The other side is a decrease in supply, so a shift to the left of the supply curve. In the previous set of slides, we looked at the supply curve shifting to the right, okay? So assume a shift to the left in the supply curve. Again, follow P1 across. We start at P1, we intersect with our new supply curve, so this green line shows us the new quantity supplied. Likewise, if we intersect with our old demand curve, we're stuck here at Q1, which is our original quantity demanded. So you can see that you would have a situation where quantity supplied is less than quantity demanded, i.e. quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. That satisfies the conditions for a shortage, okay? If we look at these two slides, have a look what's happening with price. In both scenarios, price is increasing from P1 to P2. If I go back to the other set of slides for a moment, this is a surplus. You can see that in both scenarios, price decreases from P1 to P2. Now, I want to highlight that because if you're ever drawing a market mechanism and you're trying to illustrate the change in a curve and try and sort of overall make a decision around what happens with P and Q, just be really clear that if you're dealing with a shortage, price should go up. But if you're dealing with a surplus, price should go down. So irrespective of the reason for that change, if you're dealing with a shortage, you know that price has to go up. And if you're dealing with a surplus, you know that price has to go down. All right, commit that one to memory. We'll practice it so it'll make more sense. But yeah, something just to kind of take home from today's lesson. All right, so here's an example. Based on the information in the extract above, construct a suitably labelled demand and supply diagram and illustrate the predicted impact on the market for soybeans. So have a read of this in your own time, but basically what's going on is we've got floodwaters, so we've got negative climatic conditions. So the first thing you need to do is go, right, negative climatic conditions in the market for soybeans. I'm dealing with climatic conditions. I'm dealing with a supply side factor. I haven't drawn anything yet, but I know that eventually I need to tell myself or get myself to a position where I'm able to tell the story about a decrease in supply. If you can't do that, right, if you're unable to sort of link the factor to the curve, you need to go back to demand side factors and supply side factors and get those ones right in your head. If you don't have them down pat yet, maybe just take a pause on this one and go back, because this is the building block that you absolutely have to have if we're going to move forward, okay? All right, so I want to show you the way that I'd like this done. This question specifically only asks me to illustrate. There's more coming, but this for 3 marks, I need to illustrate. So bang, there we are, okay? So because of the floodwaters, we've got negative climatic conditions in the market for soybeans. That's going to cause the supply curve to shift to the left. So before I shifted my supply curve, I went ahead and just drew my regular market mechanism. Demand, supply, P and Q. Much like what we saw right at the start, I just got on and drew this, okay? Then I went through the story that allowed me to identify that supply was going to shift to the left, got my ruler out, and I drew the shift to the left of the supply curve. So for 4 marks, guys, you need to make sure that you've got a title, You need dynamic arrows showing the shift in the curve. I'm talking about these two little arrows here. You must have them, okay? It tells the examiner exactly what you mean in terms of which way the curve is shifting without using words. You need correct labels, all of them. Price, quantity, supply 1, supply 2, demand, P, Q. It's got to be there, okay? If you don't have that, you're in trouble. And the other piece is that you need to have the dotted lines showing the changes in P and Q. So what I mean by that is these dotted lines here show me my initial equilibrium point, and then the second set of dotted lines show the second obvious equilibrium point. It's also good to have, you don't have to have it, but it's also good to have the dynamic arrows. So what I mean by this is the movements along the curves. And it's also important to have the arrows showing the change in P and Q, but not essential for full marks. The other thing I really want to reiterate here is please use a ruler, okay? There's nothing worse than the examiner has to sit down and decipher someone's pretty poor line drawing. You know, impress them. Grab a ruler. It's not hard. Okay. So for 3 marks, we've knocked that out of the park. The other part of this question is we now need to describe how the market for soybeans will move from a temporary state of disequilibrium to a new equilibrium point. Now, this is a skill, and we're going to learn it together now, and you're going to use it 100 times over before that end of year exam. Okay. So I call this the 5-step market analysis. You won't read about this anywhere else, okay? The 5-step market analysis. There's 5 steps you need to follow, and if you can answer every question accurately, you will get full marks, no questions asked, okay? So number 1, what factor causes the initial change in the demand or supply curve? Number 2, which curve and in which direction? Number 3, does this cause a shortage or a surplus at P1? We know it must be one or the other. Number 4, does this lead to upward or downward pressure on prices? And number 5, what's the overall impact to price and quantity? So keep going. So all those questions I've got on the far left-hand side, and then I've basically, this is my written answer. If this was my SAC or my exam, this is how I would answer it. I'd go, all right, due to floodwaters, there will be a decrease in the supply of soybeans. Cool. This will cause the supply curve to shift to the left. All right, let's have a look. Is that all making sense to you? So because of floodwaters, there's a decrease in supply. This leads to a shift to the left of my supply curve. All right, this creates a shortage at P1 where demand exceeds supply. So again, go to P1. If I follow the dotted line across, I can see that supply is the first intersection point, followed by demand being the second intersection point. I have a situation where demand is greater than supply. I must be dealing with a shortage, okay? This puts upward pressure on prices from P1 to P2. And overall, there's an increase in price, brackets P1, P2, and a decrease in the quantity traded Q1 and Q2, right? If you put all this on the page, you will nail it to the wall, okay? If you deviate, if you mix it up, if you add other information that maybe is not relevant, if you misread it and make a mistake, obviously that's not going to afford you full marks. So please make this your checklist in your head every time you need to. What are we doing? We are describing how a market will move from disequilibrium to equilibrium. All right. Another way this question could be asked is describe or explain how a change in random factor X would lead to a change in P and Q. All right. You must have all 5 of these to get full marks. All right. So this is just a repeat of what I already did. It's literally cut and paste from the table before. I've just put it into paragraphs and I've put it up against the graph for you to see. Any questions, reach out. Okay, here's an example that is slightly more complicated because there's probably a little bit more information and they've thrown some numbers your way. So we see below is a schedule for demand and supply of strawberries during 1 week in the summer of 2016. We've got a whole bunch of price points, and then for each price point we've got quantity demanded and quantity supplied, and you need to construct the diagram that shows all this information. Now, to obtain full marks, you don't have to plot out every single point. Okay, that's not what's required here. What's required is for you to be able to look at this information and ask yourself, where is equilibrium? Okay, so if you go through all the price points and all the quantity demanded and quantity supplied, you can see that at $10, quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, 80,000 punnets. So we're dealing with a situation where Q is equal to 80,000 and price is equal to $10. Okay. That's important because if you can't figure that out, you're going to have a really tough time drawing this demand and supply diagram. So this is what it should look like. We've got a market equilibrium diagram. We've got all the things we need. We've got a heading. We've got axes. We've got all the labeling that we have to have. And the thing that changes slightly with this diagram compared to the previous is that we're dealing with an equilibrium of not P1 and Q1, but of $10 and of 80,000. And notice next to Q, I've got in brackets number of punnets, and next to P, I've got the dollar symbol. So you've got a little bit more context for this question. They're telling you the specifics around the particular market. You're not dealing with hypothetical P and Q. You're dealing with $10 and 80,000 punnets, and you need to make that clear in your diagram for full marks, okay? Nothing's happened, nothing's changed. We just had to start here and draw our diagram. All right, so the next part of this question, we need to assume that the market is perfectly competitive, and we need to identify equilibrium price and quantity traded and explain what is meant by equilibrium. So 2 marks, this should be pretty simple. Explain what is meant by equilibrium. You can do that with a definition, and we know that it's basically to do where the amount supplied is equal to the amount demanded. And if you want to add there's no shortage or surplus, that's fine as well. And then likewise, we already know that there's $10 per punnet and there's 80,000 punnets that are being sold at this point. Cool, and then assume that during the summer there was a period of unseasonably cold weather. Okay, so negative climatic conditions are back. Examiners love this, right? So we're dealing with negative climatic conditions. I'm hoping in your mind you're thinking, right, I'm dealing with the supply curve. So you need to draw this scenario on your original graph, and then you need to show the adjustments to the market conditions. So very similar to what we did in the last question. We've got our supply curve shifting to the left. I don't know what P2 and Q2 are. I don't. I mean, we can guess what they are based on the information in the table, but we're very unlikely to know what they are accurately. So in this case, I've simply put P2 and Q2 because that's what we're dealing with here. Dotted lines, dynamic arrows, all the labels were already there, and if you feel like it, you can put the expansion and the contraction along the curve, and then obviously the arrows pointing in all the right directions. So do this and you will nail it. Okay, I wanted to show you this question because I wanted to sort of prove the reason for the use in the 5-step market analysis. So this question asks you to explain the adjustment to the equilibrium price and quantity, and it's only worth 2 marks. But I don't think it's too difficult to apply the 5-step market analysis in trying to answer this question every single time. So if you want to try and condense it down because you're thinking, well, 2 marks isn't 3 marks and I need to do less work, yeah, you can try and nut that one out, and you can try and sort of skip a few bits. I mean, I struggle to see which bit you could skip in terms of telling a succinct story. But my overriding advice here is use the whole 5-step market analysis. So 2 marks, technically, 90 seconds per mark. You've got 3 minutes to answer this question. If you've got those 5 steps in your head and you just go boom, 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 it really shouldn't be that difficult to just get them all down on paper in under 3 minutes. So I've got an example here that obviously was part of the examiner's report. However, I still feel that if you use the 5-step market analysis, that's what's going to cut it. So please use it. You can have a look, obviously, at the example that's provided if you think it's helpful to you, but just play it safe and apply that 5-step market analysis, and you can have a look at your own time, but this is a cut and paste, basically, from the last question. However, it's been updated to reflect the context of this question. I wanted to show you this one as well. This was a bit tricky for students. There were 2 particular scenarios you were given. You had to take one of them, and then you needed to illustrate it. So you weren't asked to explain it. Oh no, I lie. You do need to explain it. You have to draw it and explain it. So 2 marks for the drawing, 2 marks for the explanation. So similar to this question, you're only going to get 2 marks for the written explanation. And once again, I'm going to tell you that you probably need to make sure that you're using the 5-step market analysis, because then you'll tick everything off the list and it will all be there, and the examiner can't pin you for not having included enough detail. Similarly, you need to draw your graph with all the trimmings that we've spoken about already. The 2 examples are, you needed to talk to the Reserve Bank of Australia reducing the cash rate. That will come into light with more context down the track, but assume that you are in the market for a house and the RBA reduces the cash rate. So we're dealing with the housing market. It now becomes cheaper for me to borrow money, so we're probably going to see an increase in the demand for housing. So we needed to shift that demand curve to the right, okay? The second one got people, so the Australian government offers loan guarantees for first home buyers. We don't explicitly look at loan guarantees, but if you ever see language that's a little bit scary or a little bit different, just take a deep breath and have a good look at it and try and understand what is it trying to say to me? What does it mean? So we're dealing with the housing market. We've got the government, and they're offering loan guarantees to first home buyers. Now, without going into the nuts and bolts of what a loan guarantee is, does it sound like a good thing or a bad thing if I'm looking to borrow money? Loan guarantee. You're telling me the Australian government is going to back me now. They're going to give me a guarantee, which means I'm now a safer option for banks to lend money to. Okay, that makes it easier for me to borrow money. well, if I go to the bank to borrow more money to buy my first home, I should see an increase in the demand. So they actually both lead to the same outcome. But pick the one you like, stick with it, and go from there. Have a go. And I wanted to put this here, basically just another acronym to help you remember your demand side factors. So DISC, TIP, C. All right, D, disposable income, subs, complements, tastes and preferences, interest rates, population demographics, consumer confidence. DISC, tip C. DISC, tip C. If you can come up with something else that you like, then use it. But make sure you know what all the factors are. Similarly, we've already seen this one for your supply side factors. So stop CC. Thanks, guys.